Thank you, Bob. Peter Kroll from CETA. Just a quick question. What is your opinion on the role of strategic environmental assessment in the problems you've addressed? Thank you.
I mean, I've never personally done one, but I think they're absolutely critical, basically. I don't think there's any question. Doing things project by project, which is what people get hung up on all the time, crucial. But I think one needs sectoral strategic environmental assessments that bring together both the environmental and the social issues all together. I think separating out a social assessment from the environmental assessment, which the World Bank did a number of years ago, I don't know where they are now because I haven't worked at the bank for the last few years. I think you have to bring them together, and they clearly have to be strategic and before you even start doing project by project assessment. So clearly crucial.
Thank you, Bob. You've given us quite a lot to think about, but I was just wondering, have we actually gotten the biggest picture? We know why China and India, for instance, are still dragging their foot, and taking up obligations under the Kyoto Protocol, and why most of the developing countries are also still reluctant. I wonder, from the models you've given to us, the projections up to 2090, for instance, is this against the backdrop of a fully blown developed world, where the North and South are fully developed? I just wonder, how much can the world take? How much can the climate system take? Are we just, living in a world where we think that the developed countries will remain permanently undeveloped, and it's just, the North that will remain developed? How much can the world take? I've always pondered over this. Can the world cope with a fully developed, can the world climate system cope with a fully developed, highly industrialized world?
It's a good question. What went into the projections was we don't know what plausible changes are going to happen. We don't know what the world will look like. We can put plausible changes. So we varied economic growth and we did it region by region. We didn't do it globally. That would be pointless. So we assumed that there would be strong economic growth more in developed countries than developed, but we put a range. So we had a range of economic growth. We had a range of demographic change. We made some choices on the socio-political situation of the world working together versus being a fragmented world. We made a series of choices on technology, from staying with cheap fossil fuel versus going to sort of more heavily renewable. And that's how we came up in IPCC with a range of scenarios. I think those scenarios absolutely have to be done again, and they have to be done with policy choices in them. I think some of the scenarios are a little out of date now, but they paint a picture, basically. So they assumed, obviously, China would develop more rapidly than sub-Saharan Africa. We didn't, however, have the full rate of growth that China's currently experienced. Now, of course, China could slow down, especially if it doesn't democratize in the next few decades. So, no one knows what the future is, so it is, as I say, a series of plausible changes. Could all the world look like the US and Europe today? It would be a really challenging thought. However, I believe you could produce energy with zero emissions, close to zero emissions, and use it with zero emissions. So I'm not actually too worried about energy production and use. I do believe the technologies could be there quite soon. You'd have to couple it, I say, with policy change. You'd have to couple it with behavioural change, but you could do it. I'm a bit more concerned of how we reduce emissions in the agricultural sector. We clearly need to feed the world. But when I say we need to double, we have to be able to recognise that food demand will double in the next 50 years. There's two numbers that are really quite staggering. It isn't that you have to double food production, which most people unfortunately equate of realising the double demand. In developing countries, 30 to 40% of all food is wasted today. It doesn't get to market. It's post-harvest loss. And in Europe and in North America, probably 30 to 40% of food is all wasted once it gets to the supermarket. It's wasted in the supermarket. It's wasted in our refrigerators. It's wasted at the restaurants, etc. It's wasted on our plates. If you therefore could actually reduce post-harvest loss in developing countries and reduce waste in developed countries, you could realise that double demand with only probably a 30 to 40% increase in production. When an average sub-Saharan African farmer is getting 1 tonne per hectare of mixed maize and beans, when his Asian colleagues are getting 3, 4 and 5 tonnes, and in Europe and North America potentially 8 tonnes, we don't need any advances in science and technology to feed the world. We need rural development, we need small-scale farmers to have access to the appropriate seeds, appropriate inputs, knowledge on agroecological processes. Women farmers need extension services that are sensitive to gender balance in sub-Saharan Africa. We need women to be empowered to have access to microfinance. We need roads to get the food to market, and we need a less distorted international trade system. So could I believe that everyone can eat a reasonable menu? Yes. Can we get energy? Yes. Some real challenges on other biological resources, real challenges on water. And therefore we need sustainable production and consumption. Everything we produce, we need to think of the life cycle from the way we produce it, so the material can always be recycled and you have energy minimization along the chain. So I think you could have a world with a reasonably high standard of living, but we have to produce and use our materials in a much more sensible way than we are today, especially the wastage that we see in Europe and North America.